welcome to this episode of InterCultural Communication in Context. This is your host, Nicole Balmforth. In this section, we'll be defining and identifying the significance of the term grand narrative. This term falls under the broader concept, the power of history in intercultural communication. This section broadly looks at the dynamic of power in history. Power controls which history is taught and learned. According to Martin and Nakayama, the grand narrative is a spoken and/or written account of stories of humankind which control how people thought and think of the past, present, and future. This concept is sometimes referred to as the meta-narrative or the master narrative. A grand narrative can provide upon which an individual's own experiences and thoughts may be ordered or explained. The majority of grand narratives are pretty optimistic in their visions of humankind, meaning they shed positive light on what individuals have done. An example of a grand narrative is slavery. The narrative at the time of slavery that was widely taught and accepted was that white people were genetically better than black people, and they also taught that black people were less human than white people. However, the postmodern period condemns and no longer believes in grand narratives. Postmodernism is the movement which began in the mid to late 20th century about philosophy. This movement largely questioned assumptions and values like the grand narrative. Postmodernists consider grand narratives old-fashioned and oppressive, like the example above about the grand narrative of slavery. Postmodernism problems with the topic is that it assumes the same experiences for everyone, meaning that all individuals share the same history, yet obviously that isn't true. Black men and women did not find their written accounts of slavery the same as white men and women. The second postmodernist problem with the grand narrative is that it tends to assume that humankind is continually bettering itself. However, that is not in fact true. Our evolution and history as a species is not necessarily improving, that is purely subjective. To review what we've discussed in this episode, I've given you two definitions, one for postmodernism and one for the grand narrative. I've also given you an example of a grand narrative. And then I've also elaborated on the perspective of postmodernists and their view of the grand narrative. Thank you so much for tuning in. See you next time.